My dad used my savings for a motorcycle and told me I was selfish for wanting it back. I've always been a dreamer. Even as a kid, I believed that if I worked hard enough, I could change my life. Growing up in a small, rundown house on the outskirts of town, I spent countless nights lying awake, listening to my parents argue about bills. My dad, Jack, was a mechanic who worked long hours, but never seemed to make enough. My mom, Linda, juggled 2 part-time jobs to keep food on the table. Money was always tight, and the stress of it all hung over our family like a dark cloud. But I had a plan. I'd seen how financial instability had torn my family apart, and I was determined to break the cycle. From the moment I graduated high school, I set my sights on grad school. It wasn't just about getting a degree, it was about building a future where I wouldn't have to worry about whether I could pay the rent or put food on the table. For 5 years, I worked tirelessly. During the day, I was a receptionist at a dental office, answering phones and scheduling appointments with a smile plastered on my face. At night, I waitressed at a diner, serving greasy burgers and endless cups of coffee to truckers and late-night regulars. I lived in a tiny studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet, but I didn't care. Every dollar I saved brought me one step closer to my dream. My friends didn't understand. They'd invite me to concerts, weekend trips, and dinners at fancy restaurants, but I always said no. I'm saving for grad school, I'd explain, trying to ignore the pang of jealousy as they posted photos of their adventures on social media. I told myself it would all be worth it in the end. By the time I turned 26, I had saved $28,000. It wasn't enough to cover all of grad school, but it was a start. I opened a separate savings account, carefully transferring the money so I wouldn't be tempted to spend it. I even gave my dad access to the account, partly out of trust and partly because he'd always been the one to handle the family's finances. "It's safer this way," he'd said when I told him about the account. "In case something happens to you." I didn't think twice about it. Jack was my dad, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who'd stayed up late helping me with math homework, who'd always promised me that hard work would pay off. I trusted him completely. It was a Tuesday morning when I logged into my savings account. I'd been feeling optimistic lately. My grad school applications were almost ready, and I'd just gotten a raise at the dental office. I opened the app, expecting to see the familiar number staring back at me, $28,000. Instead, I saw $0. My heart skipped a beat. I refreshed the page, closed the app, and opened it again. Still zero. Panic set in. I called the bank, my hands shaking as I waited on hold. When the representative finally answered, I blurted out, "There's been a mistake. My savings account is empty." The representative typed something on her end. "Let me check. It looks like the funds were withdrawn in 3 transactions over the past 2 weeks. All of them were done in person at a branch. Who authorized the withdrawals?" I asked, my voice trembling. There was a pause. "It says here the withdrawals were authorized by Jack Thompson." My stomach dropped. Jack Thompson. My dad. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I thanked the representative and hung up, my mind racing. Why would he do this? Did he think I wouldn't notice? Did he even care? I called him immediately. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding annoyed. "Hey Maya." "What's up, Dad? I just checked my savings account. It's empty. The bank said you withdrew the money. What's going on?" There was a long pause. Then he said, "Oh, that, I meant to tell you." "You meant to tell me?" My voice rose. "What did you do with my money?" He sighed, like I was overreacting. "I bought a motorcycle. A Harley. Isn't it awesome?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You bought a motorcycle? With my money?" "Dad, that was for grad school." He got defensive. "You weren't using it, and I needed it. You're young, you have time to save more. I've worked my whole life and never had anything nice. I deserve this." I was speechless. I just sat there, my hands trembling, as he went on about how he'd always wanted a Harley, and how this was his chance to finally enjoy life. He even said, "You should be happy for me. After everything I've done for you, this is the least you can do." Asterisk, the least I can do. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just money I'd saved over a few months. It was 5 years of my life, 5 years of sacrifices, late nights, and saying no to everything so I could build a better future. And he just took it, like it was his all along. The more he talked, the angrier I got. I asked him if he planned to pay me back, and he laughed. He actually laughed. He said, "I'll pay you back when I can, but don't rush me. It's not like you need it right now." That's when it hit me. He didn't feel guilty at all. To him, this wasn't a betrayal, it was his right. I hung up. I couldn't listen to another word. That night, I sat in my apartment and cried for hours. I felt stupid for trusting him, but more than that, I felt betrayed. He was supposed to be the one person I could always count on. How could he do this to me? Did he even care about my dreams? Or was I just a safety net for him? The next day, I told my best friend Sarah what happened. She was furious on my behalf. "You need to demand that money back," she said. "That's your future he's messing with." I knew she was right, but I also knew my dad. He didn't have the money. He'd used my savings for the down payment, and the rest was tied up in monthly payments for a bike he couldn't afford. I felt trapped. Part of me wanted to cut him off completely, but another part felt guilty. He's my dad. He raised me. He worked so hard to provide for us growing up. Doesn't that mean I owe him something? Or am I just making excuses because I don't want to face the truth about who he really is? A few days after the confrontation with my dad, my phone started blowing up with messages from family members. My aunt, my cousins, even my mum, all of them had something to say. Apparently my dad had told them his version of the story, painting me as the ungrateful daughter who was throwing a tantrum over a little money. Your dad's been through so much. My aunt texted, he deserves to treat himself for once. You're young, you'll bounce back. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. Asterisk a little money. $28,000 wasn't a little money. It was 5 years of my life. I tried to explain, to tell them the truth, but it was like talking to a brick wall. They didn't want to hear it. To them, family loyalty meant siding with my dad, no matter what. The only person who seemed to understand was my younger brother, Ethan. He called me late one night, his voice hesitant. Hey Maya, I heard what happened with Dad. Are you okay? I sighed. Not really. He took all my savings, Ethan. Everything I've worked for. There was a long pause. Then he said, he did the same thing to me. My heart sank. What do you mean? Ethan explained that a few years ago, when he was saving up for college, Dad had borrowed a chunk of his savings to fix the roof on the house. He'd promised to pay it back, but he never did. I didn't want to cause drama, so I let it go, Ethan said, but I should have said something. I'm sorry, Maya. I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger that Dad had done this before and gotten away with it. And relief that I wasn't alone. It's not your fault, I told Ethan, but we can't let him keep doing this. He thinks he can just take from us whenever he wants, and we'll let him. Ethan hesitated. What are you going to do? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this go. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I didn't know if I had a case, but I needed to know my options. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, listened patiently as I explained the situation. It's tricky, she said. You gave him access to the account, so technically he had the right to withdraw the money. But if you can prove he misused the funds, that he took the money without your consent and for his own benefit, we might have a case. How do I prove that? I asked. Do you have any written communication with him about the money? Texts, emails, anything where he acknowledges that it was your savings? I thought back to the conversation we'd had when I opened the account. I told him it was for grad school. He said it was safer to have his name on the account in case something happened to me. Claire nodded. That could help. We'll also need to show that he had no intention of paying you back. Did he say anything about that when you confronted him? I told her about the phone call, how he'd laughed and said he'd pay me back when he could. Claire's expression hardened. That's not good enough. If he's not making a serious effort to repay you, we can argue that he misappropriated the funds. It felt strange, talking about my dad in such cold, legal terms. But I knew I had to do this. If I didn't stand up for myself now, he'd keep taking from me and from Ethan, and from anyone else who trusted him. A few days later, Dad showed up at my apartment unannounced. He parked his shiny new Harley right outside my building and knocked on my door like nothing had happened. When I opened it, he grinned and held out the keys. I thought you might want to take it for a spin. It's a real beauty. I stared at him, my stomach churning. You've got to be kidding me. His smile faltered. Come on, Maya, don't be like this. It's just a bike. It's not just a bike, I snapped. It's my future, my dreams. And you took them from me without even asking. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't think you'd mind. You've always been so responsible. I figured you'd understand. Understand what? That you think you're entitled to my hard work. That my dreams don't matter as much as yours. He looked away, his jaw tightening. I've sacrificed so much for this family. I deserve something for myself. I wanted to scream. You think I don't know about the sacrifices? I grew up watching you and Mom struggle. That's why I've been working so hard so I wouldn't end up like you. And now you've taken that away from me. For a moment, he looked like he might argue. Then his shoulders slumped, and he muttered, I'll pay you back. I just need some time. How much time? I asked. A month? A year? 5 years? Because that's how long it took me to save that money, Dad. And you took it in 2 weeks. He didn't have an answer. He just stood there, looking at me like I was the one who'd betrayed him. Finally, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway with a lump in my throat. The next few weeks were a blur. I filed a formal complaint with the bank, started the legal process, and tried to focus on rebuilding my savings. It wasn't easy. Every time I thought about what Dad had done, I felt a fresh wave of anger and hurt. Then, one night, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Dad's ex-girlfriend, Lisa. She'd heard about what happened and wanted to talk. Your dad's in trouble, she said. He's been borrowing money from everyone, friends, co-workers, even his boss. He's in way over his head. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by anger. That's not my problem. He made his choices. Lisa hesitated. There's something else. He's been talking about leaving town, selling the bike, packing up, and starting over somewhere else. My stomach dropped. What about the money he owes me? I don't think he plans to pay you back, Lisa said quietly. I'm sorry, Maya. I thought you should know. I thanked her and hung up. my mind racing. If Dad left town, I'd never see that money again. I had to act fast. The mediation meeting was tense. Dad showed up looking tired and defeated, his usual bravado gone. He admitted to taking the money but insisted he'd meant to pay me back. I just needed some time, he said, avoiding my eyes. Claire, my lawyer, wasn't having it. Time isn't a luxury your daughter has. She's been working for years to save that money, and you took it without a second thought. In the end, Dad agreed to sell the Harley and give me a portion of the proceeds. It wasn't the full $28,000, but it was something. As we left the meeting, he tried to apologize, but I cut him off. I don't want your apologies, I said. I just want you to understand what you've done. You didn't just take my money, you took my trust. And I don't know if I'll ever get that back. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded and walked away. I stood there, watching him go, and realized that this was the end of something. Not just the legal battle, but the relationship I'd always thought we had. The days following the mediation were a strange mix of relief and emptiness. On one hand, I had some of my money back, not all of it, but enough to start over. On the other hand, the relationship with my dad felt irreparably broken. I kept replaying the moment he walked away after the mediation. His shoulders slumped, his usual confidence gone. Part of me wanted to run after him, to tell him it was okay, that we could fix this. But the other part of me, the part that had cried for hours after discovering my empty savings account, knew that wasn't true. I spent the first few days after the mediation in a fog. I went to work, answered calls from concerned friends, and tried to act like everything was normal. But inside I felt like I was carrying a weight I couldn't shake. Sarah, my best friend, noticed right away. "You're not okay," she said one evening, sitting across from me at my kitchen table. "And that's fine. But you need to talk about it." I sighed, staring at the chipped edge of the table. "What's there to talk about? My dad stole from me. My family thinks I'm the bad guy and I'm back to square one with my savings. It's just a lot." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're not back to square one. You're stronger than you were before. And you stood up for yourself, Maya. That's huge." Her words stuck with me long after she left. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't the same person I'd been before all of this. But I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more interesting stories happening around you.